Sign the papers or get out. My husband thought he won when I put ink to paper that night. He thought kicking me out of my own $6.6 million penthouse was the ultimate power move to save his failing company. He smirked as I packed my bags, convinced he had finally stripped me of everything. He had no idea that my signature did not just give him a house. It triggered a poison pill clause that would bankrupt him, his mother, and his entitlement-drunk sister in less than 24 hours. My name is Genevieve, 34 years old, and I have spent my entire marriage being treated like an accessory that lost its shine. To the outside world, I am a respected archivist, restoring centuries-old manuscripts for private collections. To my husband, Preston, and his family, I am just the quiet wife with a dusty hobby who got lucky marrying a tech CEO. But silence is not weakness. It is just strategy waiting for the right moment to strike. Before I tell you how I turned their greed into their absolute destruction, please hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to teach someone a lesson they would never forget. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. The blizzard battering the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Manhattan penthouse was nothing compared to the ice in Preston's eyes. He did not just place the documents on the coffee table, he slammed the thick stack of legal papers down with enough force to make the crystal vase rattle. The sound echoed through the living room like a gunshot. I was sitting on the sofa, carefully examining a loose binding on a 17th-century medical text, my sanctuary after a long day. Preston loomed over me, his tie undone, the smell of stress and scotch radiating off him. "You need to sign this. Now," he barked, pointing a trembling finger at the document. The bold letters at the top read, "Quitclaim deed." I looked up, keeping my voice steady. "Preston, what is this?" "It is the solution to my cash flow problem, Genevieve. My investors are getting cold feet. I need leverage. Real leverage. Not the peanuts you bring in with your little book-gluing hobby." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I refused to flinch. This apartment was bought with my inheritance. It was the one thing my grandmother left me to ensure I would always have a roof over my head. Preston knew that. He had just conveniently forgotten it because his name was not on the deed. "You want me to sign over the rights to my home?" I asked, closing the book in my lap. "Our home," he corrected sharply, his face twisting into a sneer. "And let us be honest, Jen. Who pays for the lifestyle here? Who pays for the dinners, the trips, the status?" "Me. This place is dead equity. I need to collateralize it to secure the bridge loan by tomorrow morning." "You are asking me to give up my security for a gamble, Preston." "I am not asking." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I am telling you. If you do not sign that transfer tonight, I am filing for divorce in the morning. And my lawyers will argue that you are mentally unfit to manage assets. I will drag you through every court in New York until you are destitute. You will lose access to the library, the archives, everything." He stood up and crossed his arms, looking down at me with pure contempt. "So be a good little wife, sign the paper, or get out and see how far you get in this city without the Caldwell name." I stared at the paper. I stared at the man I had vowed to love. The mask had finally fallen off completely. He did not see a partner. He saw a piggy bank he could smash open. I reached for the pen. My hand did not shake. I looked him dead in the eye, searching for one last shred of humanity. "Are you absolutely sure you want me to sign this, Preston? Are you sure you have read every line?" He rolled his eyes, checking his watch. "Stop stalling. I wrote the damn thing myself to save legal fees. Just sign it." I uncapped the pen. The tip hovered over the signature line. He thought I was surrendering. He did not know that by forcing me to sign away my residency, he was unknowingly activating the most aggressive protection clause in the trust law. "Okay, Preston. You win." I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name with a flourish. "Genevieve Laurent." "There," I said, sliding the papers toward him. "It is all yours." The ink was barely dry on the paper before the double doors to the guest suite swung open. My mother-in-law Beatrice and my sister-in-law Camilla stepped out into the living room. They had not just arrived, they had been hiding in there the entire time, listening, waiting for the exact moment I signed my rights away. The betrayal was coordinated, a family affair designed to strip me bare. Beatrice did not even look at me. She walked straight to the floor-to-ceiling window, gazing out at the snow-covered Central Park, as if she had personally conquered the city. She took a sip of the champagne she had evidently brought with her into hiding. Finally, she sighed, her voice dripping with satisfaction. My son is the master of his own house. No more tiptoeing around this mousy little librarian. It is about time we brought some actual class back to the Caldwell name. Camilla did not waste time with speeches. She squealed and sprinted past me, heading straight for the master bedroom. I heard the distinct sound of my walk-in closet door being thrown open, followed by the clatter of hangers and the ripping of drawers. She emerged seconds later, draping my vintage Chanel tweed jacket over her shoulders and clutching a limited-edition Hermes clutch I had bought at an auction in Paris. God, this looks so much better on me. Camilla smirked, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror and posing for an imaginary camera. You never had the hips for it anyway, Genevieve. It was wasted on you. Besides, you won't need high fashion where you are going. I stood up, smoothing my skirt, watching them pick over my life like vultures on a fresh carcass. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell Camilla that the bag she was holding was registered to the museum archives and taking it was a federal crime. But I stayed silent. Let them dig the hole deeper. Preston walked over to the entryway closet and kicked a small, battered carry-on suitcase toward me. It skidded across the marble floor and hit the toe of my shoe. You have 15 minutes, he said, checking his Rolex, a watch I had bought him for our 5th anniversary. And do not get any ideas about taking the valuables. You leave the jewelry, the designer clothes, and the electronics. Those are marital assets now to be liquidated. You take your toiletries and your rags. Anything that looks expensive stays here to pay for the debts you caused. Debts I caused. The audacity was almost impressive. I had fully funded our lifestyle for 5 years, while his fintech startup burned through cash like kindling. But I did not argue. I did not fight. I just looked at the small suitcase. It was perfect. It was exactly enough space for the only things that actually mattered, my tools and the evidence. Beatrice turned from the window, her eyes cold and hard. Make sure she leaves the keys to the Hamptons house too, Preston. I do not want her sneaking back in there to steal the silverware. I picked up the suitcase, fighting the urge to smile. She did not know that the Hamptons house was also held by the trust. By tomorrow morning, the digital locks would reset, barring them from entry forever. I will be out in 10, I said softly. Preston scoffed, turning his back on me to pour a drink for his mother. Good, because I have a real estate appraiser coming at 8 a.m., and I do not want the place smelling like your old books. I walked past the master bedroom where Beatrice was already rearranging the pillows to suit her taste. I went straight to my study. This room was the only place in the apartment that truly felt like mine. It smelled of vanilla and almonds, the distinct scent of aging paper that always calmed my nerves. But tonight there was no calm, only cold calculation. I did not open the wardrobe. I did not pack a single dress or a pair of shoes. Let them keep the fabric. I was taking the power. I opened the safe behind the desk. Inside was my set of Japanese restoration knives, my agate burnishers, and a sleek black leather binder. That binder contained the original incorporation documents of the Laurent Preservation LLC. It was the detonator to the bomb they had just armed. I carefully wrapped a 16th century prayer book in archival tissue. It was a project I was halfway through restoring for the National Museum. Suddenly the door banged open. Camilla stood there, a glass of red wine dangerously close to spilling. She marched over and snatched the book from my hands before I could secure it. Her nails dug into the fragile leather binding. Seriously, Genevieve, she sneered, looking at the worn cover with disgust. You are taking this garbage, Preston said. To take your personal effects, not this flea market junk. We are going to turn this room into a yoga studio, so you are actually doing us a favor by clearing out this trash. She raised the book as if to toss it into the hallway pile. My reaction was instinctual. I did not just reach for it, I lunged. I grabbed her wrist with a grip strengthened by years of binding heavy manuscripts. I twisted hard. Camilla yelped, dropping the book onto the desk and stumbling back onto the Persian rug. She looked at me in shock, clutching her wrist, her wine sloshing onto her dress. "Do not ever touch history with your filthy hands," I said, my voice dropping to a register they had never heard before. "Stick to stealing purses, Camilla. It is all you are intellectually capable of understanding." I placed the book in my bag, checked the black binder one last time, and zipped the suitcase shut. I did not look back at her. I walked out of the study and down the long hallway. Beatrice was too busy instructing the housekeeper on how to scrub the floors to notice me leaving. Preston stood by the private elevator, his arms crossed, looking at me with pure disgust. He blocked the button for a moment, forcing me to stop in front of him. "Look at you," he laughed, shaking his head. "Pathetic. Do not come crawling back when you realize the real world does not care about your little hobby. Once that door closes, you are a stranger to this family." I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. I adjusted the handle of my suitcase. I looked him dead in the eye. I did not say a word. As the metal doors began to slide shut, cutting off his view of me, I let the mask slip. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. He thought he was closing the door on me. He had no idea he had just locked himself in a cage. I sat in a booth at a 24-hour diner 3 blocks away from the life I had just left. The vinyl seat was cracked, and the coffee tasted like burnt rubber, but it was the first time in years I could breathe without suffocating under the weight of the Caldwell family ego. My phone buzzed on the sticky table. It was Andre. Seeing his name made my chest tighten. He was my brother-in-law and the only decent person attached to that toxic bloodline. He was a brilliant architect who had somehow been trapped by Camilla's manipulation, just like I had been trapped by Preston's charm. I answered on the first ring. "Tell me you are okay, Jen." His voice was low and urgent. I can hear them popping champagne in the background. It is sickening. "I am fine, Andre," I said, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "Better than fine, actually." "You do not understand," he whispered, likely hiding in the guest bathroom. "I heard Preston on the phone with his bookie. It is not just the company cash flow. He is down $4 million on crypto futures and online gambling. He is drowning General. He needs that house to cover his tracks before the SEC starts asking questions." I took a slow sip of coffee. 4 million. It was worse than I thought. Preston had always been a gambler, but he masked it as high-risk investing. He walked around in custom suits believing he was a financial genius when in reality, he was just spending my inheritance. That was the irony that made me want to laugh out loud. Preston truly believed he bought that penthouse. He had convinced himself that his sporadic contributions covered the mortgage. "He has forgotten where the money came from, hasn't he?" I asked. "He thinks it is his empire," Andre scoffed. "He has completely blocked out the fact that your grandmother was the one who wired the funds from Paris. He thinks because his name is on the mailbox, the equity belongs to him. My grandmother was a woman of French nobility who survived 2 wars and 3 divorces. She did not trust men with money, and she certainly did not trust Preston. That was why she set up the trust structure he was so eager to ignore. He saw a pile of cash. She saw a fortress to protect me. Jen, you have to listen to me." Andre's voice cracked with panic. "The appraiser just pulled up downstairs. Preston is rushing him up. He is going to get a bridge loan against the property value by noon. Once that money hits his account, it will be gone. He will gamble it away or use it to pay off the sharks. You need to call the police or a lawyer. You have to stop this." I looked out the window at the gray New York morning. The city was waking up, and so was my plan. "Let him appraise it, Andre," I said calmly. "Let him value every square inch. Jen, are you crazy? He is going to steal everything." "No, Andre," I replied, signaling the waitress for the check. "He is going to try to steal everything, and that is exactly what I need him to do to trigger the trap. Just do me one favor. Stay out of the way when the explosion happens." I hung up before he could ask what I meant. Preston wanted to play the big man. I was about to let him learn that being the king of the castle does not mean much when the castle is built on a landmine. While I was sitting in a diner contemplating my next move, the destruction of my life's work had already begun. Back at the penthouse, the air was thick with the dust of centuries being recklessly disturbed. Camilla stood in the center of what used to be my climate-controlled archive. She was not just cleaning, she was purging. She held a leather-bound folio from the Dutch Golden Age. It was a text I had spent 6 months stabilizing using reversible adhesive and Japanese tissue. With a scoff of pure disdain, she tossed it into a black contractor bag filled with drywall dust and debris. "This room has such bad feng shui," Camilla complained, kicking a stack of archival boxes that contained letters from the Revolutionary War. "We need to rip out these gloomy mahogany shelves immediately. The natural light will be perfect for my morning vinyasa flow once we paint everything white." She picked up a 17th century astronomy chart, glanced at it for a second, and crumbled it into a ball before throwing it at the trash can. She missed, and the priceless document rolled across the floor like a piece of refuse. Beatrice sat on the windowsill, completely unconcerned with the cultural slaughter happening behind her. She was too busy conducting an orchestra of lies on her cell phone. She had her contact list open and was calling every socialite in the Upper East Side. "Oh, Margaret, it is just tragic," Beatrice said, her voice feigning a sorrow she did not feel. "We came over to surprise them and found out Genevieve had packed a bag. Apparently there was another man. A bartender, I think. Can you imagine? After everything Preston gave her. The poor boy is absolutely devastated. But we are holding up as a family." She paused to take a sip of coffee, checking her reflection in the glass. "Anyway, now that she is gone, we are finally going to remodel. You simply must come over for the reveal party next week. The energy is going to be so much lighter without her dark little mood hanging over us." Preston walked into the room, stepping directly onto a pile of discarded maps worth more than his car. He did not care about the books or the lies. He only cared about the leverage. He dialed his lawyer, Mr. Blackwood, and put the phone to his ear with the swagger of a man who thinks he just conquered the world. "Blackwood, it is done," Preston boomed, looking out at the skyline that he believed he now owned. "I have the quitclaim deed signed and notarized. I am sending a courier to your office right now. Start the paperwork for the $5 million credit line. I want that cash accessible by close of business today." He listened for a moment, nodding at whatever the lawyer said on the other end, completely oblivious to the fact that Blackwood had not yet seen the actual title history. "Do not worry about the details," Blackwood. Preston laughed, winking at his mother. "The asset is ours. Just get me the money. I have investors to pay." He hung up the phone and smiled. They thought they had cleared out the trash. They did not realize they had just thrown away the only shield protecting them from the law. By 8 o'clock that evening, my sanctuary had been transformed into a nightclub. The soft jazz I used to play while restoring manuscripts was replaced by thumping bass that rattled the antique window panes. From what I later learned, the guest list was a who is who of Manhattan's social climbers, people who had ignored me for years but were now eager to drink Preston's expensive champagne. They spilled Pinot Noir on my Persian rugs and used my grandmother's crystal coasters as ashtrays. It was a violation of space, a frantic attempt to erase my existence from every square foot of the penthouse. Andre arrived late. He walked into the chaos still wearing his work clothes, his tie loosened, looking like the only sober person in a room full of intoxicants. He scanned the crowd, searching for his wife, hoping perhaps to find a shred of decency left in her. Instead, he found Camila standing by the grand piano, holding court, with a group of women who were laughing too loudly. When Andre saw her, he froze. Camilla was wearing my emerald green silk gown. It was a custom piece I had worn to the gala where I was named Archivist of the Year. It was delicate, understated, and completely wrong for her. The fabric strained at the seams around her waist, and she had paired it with gaudy diamond jewelry that clashed with the dress's elegance. She looked like a child playing dress-up in her mother's closet. Andre marched over, ignoring the guests who tried to offer him a drink. He grabbed Camilla by the elbow, pulling her away from her sycophantic audience. "Are you out of your mind?" Andre hissed, his voice low but shaking with anger. "Is that Genevieve's dress?" Camilla yanked her arm back, spilling a little champagne on the silk. "So what if it is? She left it. Possession is 9/10 of the law, Andre. Besides, it looks better on me." She never had the curves to fill it out. "You are wearing the clothes of the woman you just kicked onto the street." Andre said, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Do you not have any shame? Do you not have any pride? This is theft, Camilla. It is disgusting." The room went quiet near them. Camilla's face turned crimson, not from shame, but from rage. She raised her hand and slapped Andre across the face. The sound was sharp enough to cut through the music. "Do not you dare lecture me!" she screamed, her eyes manic. "You are just a lowly architect living off my family's name. You build houses for other people while we own the skyline. Do not forget who pays for your lifestyle. We are rich now. We are the Caldwells. If you do not like it, you can get out just like she did." Andre stood there, his cheeks stinging, looking at the woman he had married. He did not yell back. He just looked at her as if she were a stranger he wanted nothing to do with. He turned around and walked toward the balcony, needing air, needing distance from the toxicity radiating off his wife. Before the tension could ruin the mood, Preston stepped onto the raised platform near the fireplace. He clinked a silver spoon against his glass, beaming with the confidence of a man who thinks he is untouchable. "Everyone please," Preston shouted, raising his glass high. "Let us not let a little domestic dispute ruin the night. We are here to celebrate a new era. For years I have been held back by dead weight, by negativity, by someone who did not understand the vision of this family." He paused for dramatic effect, looking around the room, inviting them to join in his mockery of me. "But today I finally took out the trash. I trimmed the fat. To the future of Caldwell Enterprises, and to a home that finally reflects our true worth." Cheers. The crowd cheered, raising their glasses to my demise. Preston drank deep, swallowing his victory. He did not know that the champagne he was drinking was the last expensive thing he would ever taste. He did not know that while he was toasting to his freedom, the legal gears I had set in motion were already grinding toward his destruction. The Laurent Foundation Library is a sanctuary of silence. It is a place where scholars whisper and history is treated with reverence. Naturally, Preston decided to treat it like a locker room. I was carefully applying a wheat starch paste to a torn map of the New World when the heavy oak doors swung open with a violence that made the head curator jump. Preston stormed past the security desk, ignoring the guards who tried to stop him. His heavy footsteps echoed on the marble floors, shattering the concentration of every researcher in the main hall. He spotted me at the restoration station and marched over, a manila envelope in his hand. He looked manic, his eyes bloodshot, likely from staying up all night celebrating his imaginary victory. "I told you I was not wasting time," Preston announced, his voice booming unnecessarily loud. He tossed the envelope onto the delicate surface of my workstation, dangerously close to a pot of gold leaf paste. My colleagues stared. The head curator adjusted her glasses, horrified by the intrusion. Preston soaked up the attention, mistaking their shock for respect. He wanted them to see him putting me in my place. "Divorce papers," he said, tapping the envelope with his knuckle. "Uncontested. You sign, you walk away, and you do not get a single penny of my future earnings. I am protecting my company from your incompetence." I carefully moved the map out of harm's way before looking at him. I did not feel the sting of heartbreak. I only felt the fatigue of dealing with a petulant child. "Is that all, Preston?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "No, actually," he sneered, leaning over the desk so his face was inches from mine. "One more thing. The ring. Hand it over." He pointed to the diamond solitaire on my left hand. The library was dead silent now. Everyone was listening. "I paid for it," Preston declared, lying through his teeth as usual. I remember distinctly that he had put it on a credit card that I later paid off, but facts never mattered to him. I need to liquidate it. I need cash for the real lawyers who are going to crush you if you try to fight this. So give it back. Now. I looked down at the ring. It was a decent stone, but nowhere near the clarity he claimed it had when he proposed. Like everything else with Preston, it was flashy on the surface, but flawed underneath. I slid the band off my finger. It felt heavy, not with value, but with the weight of 5 wasted years. Preston held out his hand, palm open, greedy and expectant. In his other hand, he held a steaming cup of takeout coffee from the expensive cafe down the street. "You want to liquidate it?" I asked softly. "Be my guest." I held the ring over his cup. He realized what I was doing a split second too late. I let go. The ring hit the dark, scalding liquid with a satisfying splash. Hot coffee sprayed up onto his white cuff and his wrist. Preston yelped, jumping back and nearly dropping the cup. "You crazy witch!" "Careful," I said, picking up my brush and returning to the map without looking at him. "Try not to burn yourself getting it out." Although, honestly, Preston, the resale value of that ring will not even cover the interest on the debt you are drowning in. You should probably run along to the bank now. I hear they have a very strict policy about closing time. While Preston was likely still icing his scalded wrist, his sister was busy committing a federal crime back at the apartment. Camilla had spent the afternoon tearing through the back of the storage closet, convinced I had hidden cash or jewelry behind the walls. She did not find money. Instead, she found a small unframed oil painting wrapped in brown paper. It was a moody landscape no bigger than a postcard depicting a storm over a harbor. To Camilla, it looked like a dusty piece of flea market decor. To a trained eye, it was a rare study by a 19th century master on loan to me from the National Museum for Restoration. She shoved it into her oversized tote bag and hailed a cab to the Lower East Side. She headed straight for a high-end pawn shop that masqueraded as an antique dealership. The owner, a man named Silas, was someone I had worked with for years. He knew the difference between a reproduction and a masterpiece. He also knew me. I was organizing my temporary workspace in a hotel room when my phone rang. It was Silas. "Genevieve," he whispered, his voice tense. "Your sister-in-law is standing at my counter. She is trying to sell me the Hudson River study, the one with the micro tear in the canvas. She says it is hers." My heart stopped for a second, then beat with a heavy, rhythmic satisfaction. Camilla had just crossed the line, from being a nuisance to being a felon. "How much is she asking for it?" I asked. "She has no idea what it is." Silas chuckled darkly. "She wants $5,000 cash. She says she needs it for a deposit on a new car. Jen, this piece is insured for $50,000. If I buy it, I am technically receiving stolen goods." "Buy it." "Silas," I commanded, my voice cold. "Give her the 5,000. Give it to her in small bills so she feels rich. But make sure of one thing. Make sure she signs the bill of sale with her full legal name. I need a paper trail that proves she sold property that never belonged to her." "Are you sure?" he asked. "Absolutely. Consider it a down payment on her prison sentence." I hung up and waited. An hour later, Silas sent me a photo of the receipt. Camilla's signature was scrawled across the bottom in confident blue ink. She had walked out of that shop clutching $5,000, likely feeling like a genius. She probably went straight to a luxury car dealership, ready to lease a vehicle she could not afford, thinking she had just pulled a fast one on me. She did not know that the $5,000 was not a windfall. It was bait. By selling that painting, she had not just stolen from me, she had stolen from the National Museum. The FBI has a special division for art theft, and thanks to the receipt Silas just filed, they would have an easy time finding the culprit. Camilla thought she was cashing out. In reality, she had just sold her freedom for the price of a used sedan. My phone began vibrating incessantly on the nightstand of the hotel room. It was not a call. It was a deluge of notifications. I picked it up, squinting against the harsh blue light, and opened the local community app used by the residents of our building and the surrounding Upper East Side neighborhood. There, at the very top of the feed, was a post from Beatrice Caldwell. It was accompanied by a photo of me looking disheveled from a camping trip 3 years ago, a photo she had deliberately cropped to make me look manic. The caption read, "It is with a heavy heart that we ask for privacy during this difficult time. Our daughter-in-law Genevieve has suffered a severe break from reality due to her unmedicated condition. She has left the safety of our home and may be a danger to herself. If you see her, please do not approach. We are just praying she accepts the help she so desperately needs. Hashtag mental health awareness. Hashtag pray for Preston." I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. She was not just kicking me out. She was dismantling my reputation. She was painting me as a schizophrenic liability to ensure that if I tried to claim the apartment, no judge would take me seriously. The comments were already rolling in. Neighbors I had shared elevator rides with for years were offering their sympathies to Beatrice. "So brave of you to handle this," Beatrice, one woman wrote. "I always knew something was off about her," commented another. "Poor Preston having to deal with a crazy wife while running a company." Then the email notification popped up. It was from the head of the preservation board at the library. Subject line concern. The body of the email was polite but firm, asking if the rumors regarding my health would impact my ability to handle the delicate manuscripts next week. Beatrice's lie had traveled from the gossip pages to my paycheck in less than 20 minutes. I put the phone down. I did not cry. I did not reply to the comments to defend myself. Engaging with a narcissist only gives them fuel. Instead, I opened my laptop. I pulled up the encrypted email server I used for legal correspondence. I typed in the address of my personal attorney, a man who had been my grandmother's fiercest protector. I wrote a single line in the body of the email. "Beatrice has violated the non-disparagement clause of the implied residency agreement. Activate the poison pill immediately." I hit send. My finger lingered on the trackpad. This was it. There was no going back. By sending that email, I was not just suing them, I was nuking the ground they stood on. 2 minutes later, a reply pinged. "Understood. The eviction notice and the retroactive rent demand are being filed with the court as we speak. Let the games begin." I closed the laptop and walked to the window. I looked out at the city lights. Beatrice thought she had destroyed me with a Facebook post. She did not realize she had just handed me the match to burn her entire world down. The showroom smelled of handcrafted Italian leather and unearned confidence. Preston ran his hand along the curve of a Rosso Corsa Ferrari Roma Spider, looking at it not as a vehicle, but as a trophy he believed he had already won. Beside him, Beatrice was inspecting the stitching on the seats, nodding approvingly as if she had personally commissioned the design. They were spending money that did not exist yet, banking entirely on the delusion that the bank would deposit $5 million into Preston's account the next morning. "I will take it," Preston announced to the salesman, adjusting his suit jacket. "And I want the carbon fiber package." "Excellent choice, sir," the salesman said, his eyes gleaming. "We will just need a $20,000 deposit to hold the vehicle for delivery next week." Preston pulled out his platinum credit card. I knew the limit on that card was $25,000, and he was currently carrying a balance of $3,000 from his online poker losses the night before. He was maxing out his last lifeline on a down payment for a car he would never drive. He handed the card over with a flourish, not a tremble in his hand. "Put it through," Preston said. "The rest will be wired tomorrow. My liquidity is about to increase significantly." The salesman walked away to process the transaction. Beatrice squeezed Preston's arm. "You deserve this, darling. You have worked so hard dealing with that woman. It is time you treated yourself to something that actually has class." Preston's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, frowning, when he saw the notification from the building concierge complaining about the smell of stale champagne and garbage in the penthouse hallway. The cleaning service had not arrived. His face darkened. He dialed my number, stepping away from his mother to scream at me. I answered on the second ring, sitting comfortably in my lawyer's office, watching the final seal being placed on the eviction notice. "What did you do with the maid?" Preston barked, skipping a greeting. "The apartment is a disaster. There are glasses everywhere and the cleaning crew did not show up." Did you forget to schedule them? I smiled at the phone. He actually expected me to manage his household from a hotel room after he had thrown me out. The level of incompetence was staggering. I did not forget anything, Preston, I said calmly. I cancelled the contract. The cleaning service was under my name, paid for by my account. Since I no longer reside there, I have no obligation to clean up your mess. You are petty, Genevieve, he hissed, glancing back to make sure the salesman was not watching him lose his temper. You need to call them back. I have the appraiser coming back for a final walkthrough later. If the place looks like a frat house, it reflects poorly on the valuation. Fix it. I am not your secretary anymore, Preston, and I am certainly not your maid. You wanted to be the master of the house. Then pick up a broom. The salesman returned, handing Preston the receipt and the card. Approved, sir. Preston snatched the card back, feeling a surge of adrenaline. He felt invincible again. He put the phone back to his ear, his voice dripping with venom. Fine. I will hire a better service, one that costs double. And I will send the bill to your lawyer. You are going to regret playing these games with me, Jen. I am holding the keys to the kingdom now. Enjoy the view from the top. Preston, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. Enjoy it today, because the fall is going to be very long and very painful. I hung up before he could respond. He pocketed his phone, turned to his mother, and smiled, completely unaware that he had just bought a Ferrari with money that was about to vanish into thin air. I was sitting in the corner of the hotel lobby, reviewing the final draft of the eviction notice on my tablet when Andre walked in. He looked like a ghost. His usually immaculate suit was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and moral wars being fought in his head. He did not wave. He just walked straight to my table and sat down heavily across from me, looking over his shoulder as if he expected Beatrice to pop out from behind a potted plant. Without a word, he slid a hand across the marble table. When he lifted it, a single brass key lay on the coaster. Camilla thinks she collected every set, Andre said, his voice raspy. She forgot that I designed the service entrance security protocol. That key bypasses the digital locks. It is the only way in that she cannot control from her phone. I looked at the key, the metal glinting under the lobby chandelier. It was a peace offering. It was a betrayal of his wife and a salvation of his conscience. Why are you giving me this, Andre? I asked. Because I heard them talking this morning, he whispered, leaning in close. They are not just remodeling, Jen. They are liquidating. Preston contacted a private broker about the library collection. They plan to start selling the manuscripts individually next week. They are calling it a fire sale. My grip tightened on my coffee cup. Selling the furniture was one thing. Selling the archives, which legally belonged to the Preservation Trust, was a felony that would put them in federal prison for decades. They have no idea what they are touching, I said. They do not care. Andre shook his head, looking down at his hands. I looked at Camilla last night wearing your clothes, laughing about how she was going to turn your study into a yoga studio while selling off history to pay for her vanity. I did not recognize her, General. I realized I am married to a monster, and I cannot live with monsters anymore. He looked up at me, tears forming in his eyes. I am done. I am meeting with a divorce lawyer on Monday. But I needed you to have this. You need to stop them before they destroy everything you built. I reached out and covered his hand with mine for a brief moment before taking the key. I slipped it into my pocket. It was heavy, not just with metal, but with the weight of the alliance we had just formed. You are a good man, Andre, I said softly. You are the only one of them who deserves to walk away clean. I do not want to be clean, he said bitterly. I just want to be free. Then listen to me very carefully. I said, my tone shifting from sympathetic to urgent. You do not need to do anything to stop them. The machine is already in motion. But if you have any pity left for Camilla, even a shred, get her out of that apartment tomorrow morning. Andre frowned. Why? What is happening tomorrow? Take her to breakfast. Take her for a walk. I do not care. I said, standing up and gathering my things. Just make sure she is not inside those walls at 9 o'clock, because when the clock strikes 9, the legal shield comes down. And if she is standing in the blast zone, I cannot promise she will survive the fallout. The master bathroom of the penthouse was a marvel of modern engineering designed to feel like a private spa floating above the Manhattan skyline. Preston lay back in the soaking tub, the jets humming a low, rhythmic lullaby. He held a crystal glass filled with a 1982 Bordeaux he had pulled from the back of my climate-controlled cellar. He had no idea that the bottle was worth more than his car, or that I was saving it for a special occasion. To him it was just expensive grape juice that tasted like victory. He closed his eyes, letting the steam rise around him. In his mind, the future was already written in gold. The loan would clear tomorrow. He would inject the capital into his failing fintech startup, silence the board of directors, and finally be the titan of industry he pretended to be at cocktail parties. He imagined the headlines. Preston Caldwell, the visionary who turned it all around. His phone, balanced precariously on the marble edge of the tub, buzzed with a sharp, intrusive vibration. Preston cracked one eye open, annoyed at the interruption. The screen lit up with a notification from the bank. Loan application status suspended. Title defect detected. Please contact compliance immediately. Preston frowned, sitting up and splashing water onto the floor. He wiped his wet hand on a towel and unlocked the phone. He stared at the message, his brow furrowing. Suspended, he muttered to the empty room. What kind of incompetent algorithm is this? He tapped the screen aggressively, refreshing the banking app. It showed the same error. He tossed the phone onto the pile of fluffy towels, splashing more wine into his glass. Glitch, he decided aloud, convincing himself with the arrogance of a man who refuses to see the cliff edge. It is just a system error. The title transfer hasn't updated in the database yet. I will scream at the branch manager in the morning until he overrides it. He leaned back, closing his eyes again. He did not call the bank. He did not check his email. He simply decided that reality was wrong and he was right. He took another sip of the stolen wine, letting the warm buzz lull him back into his fantasy. Across town, in a high-rise office building where the lights never turned off, the atmosphere was far less relaxing. Mr. Blackwood, Preston's attorney, was working late trying to salvage another one of Preston's messy contracts. The office was silent save for the rhythmic, mechanical whir of the high-speed fax machine in the corner. It started with a single page, then another, then another. Blackwood looked up from his desk, rubbing his tired eyes. In 2024, nobody used fax machines unless they wanted to send a message that could not be ignored, deleted, or filtered into a spam folder. It was a statement of legal aggression. He walked over to the machine. The paper tray was filling up rapidly. He picked up the cover sheet. The letterhead was embossed and heavy. The sender was not a divorce lawyer. It was the premier litigation firm representing the Laurent Preservation Trust. Blackwood's eyes scanned the bold text in the center of the page. Notice of immediate eviction, lease violation, and demand for retroactive tax liability. He flipped to the second page. His face usually flushed with the confidence of a shark drained of all color. He saw the clause about the poison pill. He saw the calculation of damages. He saw the section detailing criminal liability for theft of trust assets. He dropped the paper onto the desk, as if it were burning his fingers. He looked at the phone, then at the clock. It was nearly midnight. He realized with a sickening lurch in his stomach that his client, the arrogant man currently bathing in a stolen tub, had not just lied to his wife. He had lied to his lawyer. And now they were both standing in the path of a legal tsunami that was going to make landfall at exactly 9 o'clock the next morning. The morning sun glared off the polished marble floors of the private wealth division at First Manhattan Bank. Preston walked in at exactly 9 o'clock, adjusting the cuffs of his suit. He looked every inch the successful tycoon he pretended to be. He breezed past the assistant, ignoring her attempt to check him in, and marched straight toward the glass-walled office of the branch manager, Mr. Henderson. In Preston's mind, the money was already in his account. He was just there to sign the receipt. He pushed the door open without knocking, a confident smile plastered on his face. "Good morning, Henderson," Preston announced, tossing his leather portfolio onto the mahogany desk. "Let us make this quick. I have a Ferrari to pick up and investors waiting on a wire transfer. Just show me where to sign." Mr. Henderson did not smile. He did not stand up to shake Preston's hand. He sat perfectly still, his hands clasped over a single thin file folder. The air in the room was colder than the blizzard outside. "Please sit down, Mr. Caldwell," Henderson said, his voice devoid of any warmth. Preston frowned, sensing the shift in atmosphere. He remained standing, asserting dominance. "I do not need to sit. I need the liquidity. We agreed on a $5 million bridge loan against the penthouse equity. The appraisal came in high yesterday." "What is the holdup?" "There is no loan," Mr. Caldwell Henderson said flatly. "Your application has been denied with prejudice." Preston let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Denied? Do not be ridiculous. I have a credit score of 700, and the asset is worth over $6 million. Stop playing games and print the check." Henderson opened the folder and slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a title search report stamped with a heavy red rejection seal. "We cannot lend against collateral you do not own," Henderson explained calmly. "That is a lie," Preston shouted, slamming his hand down on the desk, making the banker's nameplate jump. "I own it. My wife signed the quitclaim deed last night. I have the document right here." He scrambled to open his portfolio, ripping out the paper I had signed with such theatrical flair. He shoved it into Henderson's face. "Look, Genevieve Laurent, she relinquished all rights. It is my property." Henderson barely glanced at the paper. He looked at Preston with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Mr. Caldwell, you are not listening. Your wife signed a quitclaim deed. That document only transfers whatever interest she personally held in the property." "Exactly," Preston interrupted. "So it is mine." "No, sir," Henderson continued, his voice hardening. "Our title search this morning revealed that Genevieve Laurent as an individual holds 0% interest in that penthouse. The property is titled solely to the Laurent Preservation Limited Liability Company." Preston froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Your wife signed away her personal rights, which were non-existent to begin with," Henderson explained, closing the file. "She effectively gave you a piece of paper that says she gives you nothing. The LLC owns the real estate, and unless you are the managing member of that LLC, which our records show you are not, you have absolutely no authority to leverage this asset." The room spun around Preston. The silence was deafening. "You are telling me," Preston whispered, his voice trembling with rage, "that the paper she signed is worthless. I am telling you that you just tried to defraud a federal bank by pledging assets that belong to a corporate entity you have no control over." Henderson stood up, signaling security with a subtle nod. "We are done here, Mr. Caldwell. I suggest you leave before I file a report for attempted mortgage fraud." Preston stormed out of First Manhattan Bank, his face a mask of red-hot fury. The rejection from Henderson had not humbled him. It had only enraged him. He believed it was a conspiracy, a clerical error, or perhaps just a banker holding a grudge. He did not see the legal wall he had just crashed into. He only saw an obstacle that needed to be bulldozed with money. He threw his leather portfolio into the passenger seat of his leased sedan and peeled away from the curb, cutting off a taxi driver who honked aggressively. Preston ignored it. He was already mentally calculating which other banks he could manipulate. He was merging onto the avenue when his car's Bluetooth system screamed with an incoming call. The caller ID flashed Blackwood Esquire. Preston hit the answer button on the steering wheel, ready to vent. "Blackwood, you are not going to believe the incompetence I just dealt with. Henderson is claiming there is a title defect. You need to call him and threaten a lawsuit for shut up." Preston Blackwood's voice exploded through the surround sound speakers so loud and distorted with rage that Preston actually flinched. The lawyer was not using his usual calm, billable hour tone. He sounded like a man who had just realized he was holding a live grenade. Get your corpse to my office immediately, Blackwood roared. Do not stop for coffee. Do not make any more calls. Get here now. Preston frowned, changing lanes without signaling. What is your problem? It is just a mix-up with the deed. Genevieve didn't sign over a damn thing because you didn't tell me she was the managing member of a preservation trust. Blackwood cut him off, his voice cracking. You told me the property was a marital asset. You told me she was a housewife with a hobby. You did not tell me I was filing fraudulent transfer documents against a corporate entity protected by ironclad bylaws. Preston rolled his eyes. He still did not get it. To him, an LLC and a trust were just fancy words for bank accounts. Stop being dramatic, Blackwood Preston said, checking his reflection in the rearview mirror. It is just paperwork. She is my wife. Her assets are my assets. If the paperwork is wrong, just draft a new version. I will pay the overtime. You think this is about overtime? Blackwood laughed, a harsh, dry sound. I have a 50-page fax on my desk from the Laurent Foundation's legal team. They are not just contesting the transfer, Preston. They are alleging criminal fraud. Do you realize what you have done? You have exposed my firm to malpractice liability. Listen to me, Preston said, his voice dropping to that smooth, manipulative tone he used on investors. I know how this works. Everyone is just looking for a bigger cut. Whatever fee they are asking for, double it. I will write you a personal check for $10,000 right now if you fix this before noon. Just make the problem go away. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. It was the silence of a lawyer realizing his client was too arrogant to save. Bring your checkbook, Preston Blackwood said, his voice suddenly deadly quiet. But not for me. You are going to need it to pay for your bail. The line went dead. Preston scoffed, tossing his phone onto the passenger seat. He merged onto the highway, speeding toward Midtown. He shook his head, convinced that Blackwood was just trying to squeeze him for more money. He thought he could buy his way out of anything. He did not know that he was driving straight into a room where his checkbook would be useless, and his arrogance would be his death sentence. Preston walked into the law offices of Blackwood and Associates with his checkbook in hand, ready to buy his way out of what he still considered a minor administrative annoyance. He did not notice that the receptionist refused to make eye contact with him, or that the junior associates were whispering as he passed. He pushed open the heavy oak doors to Blackwood's private office, a confident smile plastered on his face. Here is the retainer, Preston announced, tossing the check onto the desk. 10,000. Now pick up the phone and fix this title mess. I have a car to pick up. Mr. Blackwood did not look at the check. He did not offer Preston a seat. In a moment of poetic justice that mirrored the scene in my living room less than 24 hours prior, Blackwood picked up a thick, heavy legal file and hurled it across the room. It struck Preston square in the chest, the force of it knocking the wind out of him and scattering papers all over the expensive Persian rug. "What is wrong with you?" Preston shouted, stumbling back and clutching his chest. "Read it!" Blackwood roared, slamming his hand onto the desk. "Read the document you were too arrogant to check." Preston knelt down, his hands shaking as he picked up the top sheet. It was a deed, but it did not look like the one he had drafted. At the top, in bold, unforgiving letters, it read, "Property of Laurent Preservation, LLC. You told me the apartment was a marital asset." Blackwood hissed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "You told me your wife bought it with family money." "You lied." "I did not lie," Preston stammered, scanning the legal jargon he could barely comprehend. "She said it was her inheritance." "It is her inheritance, you moron," Blackwood yelled. "But she does not own the bricks and mortar. The Laurent Preservation LLC owns it." Genevieve was merely the designated caretaker and archivist. Her residency there was a condition of her employment by the trust. Preston stood up, the paper crumpling in his fist. "So what, I am her husband. That makes me a resident too." Blackwood laughed, a cold, dry sound that echoed off the walls. No, Preston. That made you a guest. A guest whose right to remain on the premises was entirely dependent on the caretaker living there. The lawyer walked around the desk, invading Preston's personal space. When you forced her to sign that quitclaim deed, you thought you were taking title. You were not. You were forcing the caretaker to resign. You handed the trust documented proof that the unit is no longer occupied by their employee. Do you understand what you did? Preston stared at him blankly, his brain unable to process the magnitude of his error. You triggered a breach of contract, Blackwood explained, spelling it out like he was talking to a toddler. The moment Genevieve left the building, the apartment ceased to be a residence. It reverted to its primary classification: commercial storage for historical artifacts. Blackwood pointed a trembling finger at the door. You do not own that house, Preston. You do not own a single tile in the bathroom or a plank in the floor. You just evicted the only person on earth who gave you the legal standing to sleep there for free. And now, thanks to your little power play, you are not a homeowner. You are a trespasser in a corporate warehouse. Blackwood reached across the desk and stabbed his finger onto the middle of page 14. The sound of his nail hitting the paper was sharp enough to make Preston flinch. Look at Clause 14b, Blackwood commanded, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. It is a provision known in estate law as a poison pill. It was designed specifically for a scenario where the caretaker is removed under duress. Preston squinted at the dense legal text. He saw words like contingency reclassification and commercial zoning, but his brain refused to connect the dots. I do not care about zoning. Blackwood. Preston scoffed, trying to regain his composure. So what? I pay a fine. I pay a penalty fee. Just tell me how much so I can write the check and leave. It is not a fine, Preston, Blackwood said, leaning back in his leather chair and watching his client with a look of grim satisfaction. It is a reclassification of usage. You see, as long as Genevieve lived there, the penthouse was legally designated as a climate-controlled archive annex. It was tax-exempt. It was protected. Her presence there as the chief archivist was the only thing keeping that designation active. The lawyer paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment before delivering the blow. But last night, when you forced her to sign a document stating she had vacated the premises, you automatically triggered a status change. The apartment is no longer a preservation site. It has reverted to its secondary zoning status: high-density commercial real estate. Preston shifted in his seat, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. And what does that mean for me? It means, Blackwood said, tapping the paper again, that you are no longer living in your wife's apartment. You are currently squatting in a commercial warehouse owned by a limited liability company. And according to the bylaws, you just activated, any unauthorized occupant remaining on the premises after the caretaker departs is subject to the standard commercial lease rate for that zip code. Preston waved his hand dismissively. Fine, so I pay rent. What is it, $5,000 a month? I can handle that. Blackwood let out a dark, humorless laugh. He picked up a calculator and started punching in numbers, the clicking sound echoing in the silent office. This is a 6,000-square-foot penthouse overlooking Central Park in a commercial zone, Preston. The fair market value is $45,000 a month. Preston's jaw dropped. $45,000? That is insanity. Wait, Blackwood interrupted, holding up a hand. I am not finished. Since you were never listed on the preservation contract as an employee, and you have been living there for 5 years, the clause dictates that your occupancy has been unauthorized since day one. The rent is retroactive. The blood drained from Preston's face. He looked at the calculator. He looked at the lawyer. Retroactive, he whispered. Yes, Blackwood said, turning the calculator around so Preston could see the screen. You owe the Laurent Preservation, LLC, 5 years of back rent at the commercial rate, plus interest. You do not just owe a penalty, Preston. You owe a debt that is going to swallow you whole. The office door opened with a soft, ominous click, and a man who looked like he had never smiled in his life walked in. This was Blackwood's senior forensic accountant. He did not say a word. He simply placed a single sheet of paper on the mahogany desk right next to Preston's trembling hand. The paper was not a contract. It was an invoice. It was a breakdown of costs so detailed and so devastating that it sucked the oxygen right out of the room. Preston looked down. His eyes scanned the rows of numbers. Base rent for 60 months at the commercial rate of $45,000 a month totaled nearly $2.7 million alone. Then came the late fees compounded daily. Then the legal administrative penalties for unauthorized commercial usage. The number at the bottom of the page was bolded and circled in red ink. $3,200,000. Preston made a sound that was half laugh, half choke. He looked up at Blackwood, his face pale and slick with sweat. He pointed a shaking finger at the paper. "This is a joke, right?" Preston stammered, his voice rising in pitch. "I do not have $3 million in liquid cash. My entire net worth is tied up in the company and the crypto market. You know that I cannot pay this." "Then you will be insolvent by the end of the week," the accountant said, speaking for the first time. His voice was as dry as the paper he had printed. "No!" Preston screamed, slamming his fist onto the invoice, crumbling the corners. "This is illegal. We are married. In the state of New York, assets acquired during marriage are community property. That apartment, the equity, the trust, it is all marital assets. If I owe rent, I owe it to myself." He stood up, pacing frantically, trying to use the same bullying tactics he used in boardrooms. "I will sue her for half of that LLC. I will dissolve the trust. I am her husband. What is hers is mine." Blackwood sighed, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. He looked at Preston with the exhaustion of a man who realizes he is defending a fool. "Sit down, Preston," Blackwood commanded, his voice cutting through the panic. "And listen to me very closely, because I am only going to explain this once." Preston stopped pacing, breathing heavily. "You are operating under the delusion that marrying a rich woman automatically makes you rich," Blackwood said coldly. "But Genevieve's grandmother was smarter than you. She set up a dynasty trust. The assets within it, the apartment, the collection, the cash were inherited. In the United States, inherited property that is kept separate and never commingled with marital funds is never considered community property." Blackwood leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Preston's. "You never paid the mortgage, you never paid the taxes, you never put your name on the deed, therefore you have zero claim to the asset. But by living there and using it for your business meetings, you created a tax liability. And that is the worst part, Preston. The Laurent LLC is a tax-exempt entity. By turning it into your personal bachelor pad, you violated their tax status. You have not just angered your wife, you have kicked the hornet's nest of the IRS. And unlike Genevieve, the federal government does not accept apologies." The silence that followed Blackwood's explanation of the tax liability was heavy enough to crush a man, but it was broken by a sharp, authoritative knock on the glass door. Before Blackwood could even shout for his secretary, the door swung open. A man in a nondescript beige windbreaker stepped inside. He did not look like a lawyer or a banker. He looked like the kind of person who delivered bad news for a living and slept soundly afterwards. He scanned the room, his eyes landing instantly on the man sweating through his bespoke Italian suit. "Preston Caldwell?" the stranger asked, holding a thick envelope. Preston blinked, disoriented. "Yes, who are you?" "You have been served," the man said, dropping the envelope onto Preston's lap before turning on his heel and walking out. He did not wait for a reaction. He had done his job. Preston stared at the envelope. It bore the seal of the New York State Supreme Court. His hands were shaking so violently he tore the paper as he ripped it open. He pulled out the documents, his eyes darting across the legal jargon. "What is this?" Preston whispered, his voice barely audible. Blackwood reached over and snatched the papers from him. The lawyer scanned the first page, then the second. He let out a low whistle, leaning back in his chair. It is an ex parte order of attachment and an emergency writ of ejectment, Blackwood said, tossing the papers back onto the desk. Genevieve's lawyers didn't just file a lawsuit, Preston. They convinced a judge that you are a flight risk and a squatter causing imminent damage to historical property. What does that mean in English? Preston screamed, standing up. It means, Blackwood replied calmly, that the court has granted an immediate freeze on all your personal assets to ensure the debt to the LLC can be paid, and it means you have exactly 2 hours to vacate the premises before the marshals remove you by force. Preston fumbled for his phone. He opened his banking app, his thumb tapping the screen frantically. He needed to see his money. He needed to know he still had control. The Face ID unlocked the app, but instead of his balance, a gray dialog box popped up in the center of the screen. Account suspended. Court order docket number 49,221. Please contact the legal department. He tried his crypto wallet. Locked. He tried his brokerage account. Frozen. Every single dollar he thought he owned, every cent he planned to use to fight me, was now held in legal limbo. They cannot do this, Preston yelled, throwing his phone across the room. It smashed against the wall, cracking the screen, a fitting metaphor for his life. They just did, Blackwood said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. And since your assets are frozen, that means your retainer check is going to bounce. Which means, as of this moment, I am no longer your attorney. Preston looked at the man he thought would save him. He looked at the shattered phone. He looked at the quitclaim deed lying on the floor, the piece of paper he had forced me to sign less than 24 hours ago. He remembered his own voice, arrogant and commanding, telling me to sign or get out. He realized with a sickening jolt that by forcing my hand, he had not signed a victory treaty. He had signed his own death warrant. He had effectively evicted himself, bankrupted himself, and destroyed his reputation, all with one signature he thought was his masterstroke. Back at the penthouse, the celebration of a victory that never happened was reaching its peak. Beatrice was lounging on the velvet sofa, holding a glass of vintage champagne she had looted from my cellar. She was laughing loudly, telling a group of sycophants how she planned to replace my antique bookshelves with mirrored walls. Beside her, Camilla was in the middle of a live stream. She held her phone high, spinning around to show off the view of Central Park to her 3,000 followers. "Look at this view, guys," Camilla shouted into the camera, preening in my dress. "This is what generational wealth looks like. We are finally getting rid of the bad energy in this place and making it ours." Suddenly, the world went black. It was not a flicker. It was a hard cut. The power to the entire unit was severed instantly. The thumping bass of the music died, leaving a ringing silence that was more deafening than the noise. The only light came from the screen of Camilla's phone, casting a ghostly blue glow on her confused face. "What happened?" Beatrice shrieked, her voice trembling in the darkness. "Camilla, did you trip over a cord?" Before Camilla could answer, the heavy double doors at the entrance were forced open with a mechanical hiss. Beams of high-powered tactical flashlights cut through the dark, blinding everyone in the room. A team of 6 men marched in. They moved with a synchronized military precision that froze every guest in place. They were not the police. They were far more intimidating. They wore sharp black suits and ballistic vests emblazoned with the silver crest of the Laurent Preservation Trust. "Clear the room," the lead officer commanded. His voice was calm, but projected enough authority to shatter the tension. "You have 2 minutes to vacate the premises before we begin forcibly removing trespassers." The guests did not need to be told twice. Socialites and hangers-on scrambled for the exit, tripping over each other in the dark to escape the raid. Beatrice stood up, knocking over her champagne glass. "Who do you think you are?" she screamed, trying to summon her usual entitlement. "This is my son's house. I will have you arrested for breaking and entering." The lead officer ignored her completely, signaling his men to secure the perimeter. He walked straight toward Camilla, who was still holding her phone, pointing the camera at him in a desperate attempt to use social media as a shield. "You are live streaming a crime scene, Miss Caldwell. the officer said, stepping into her personal space. "I suggest you turn that off." Camilla lowered the phone, her face twisting into a snarl. "Get out of my house. My brother owns this building. You are the ones breaking the law." The officer looked down at her with cold indifference. He pulled a folded court order from his jacket pocket and held it up to the light. "This is not a house," the officer replied, his voice cutting through her hysteria. "This is a secure commercial archive under the protection of the Laurent Trust. You are currently committing federal trespassing on a designated historical site. You have exactly 60 seconds to step into the hallway, or you will be carried out in zip ties." Preston abandoned his leased sedan in the middle of Fifth Avenue, leaving the driver's side door wide open as horns blared behind him. He did not care about traffic laws or the tow truck that would inevitably come. He only cared about the spectacle unfolding on the sidewalk in front of the building he claimed to own. It was a scene of absolute chaos, a mirror image of the cruelty he had inflicted on me the night before, but amplified by a magnitude of 10. The sidewalk was not clear. It was littered with the detritus of his ego. His custom leather recliner was upside down in a pile of gray slush. His collection of limited edition sneakers had been dumped out of a bin and were currently soaking up the melting snow. His golf clubs, which he treated better than he ever treated me, were scattered across the pavement like broken twigs. Standing amidst the wreckage of his life were Beatrice and Camilla. Beatrice was shivering in her fur coat, clutching a half-empty bottle of warm champagne, her mascara running down her face in dark, tragic streaks. Camilla was screaming at a doorman who was studiously ignoring her, holding her phone up as if recording the injustice would somehow reverse it. Preston sprinted toward them, his face purple with exertion and rage. When he saw the team of private security guards blocking the gold-plated revolving doors, something inside him finally snapped. These were not police officers. To him, they were just hired muscles standing between a king and his castle. "Get out of my way!" Preston screamed, not breaking his stride. He lunged at the lead officer, swinging a wild, uncoordinated fist aimed at the man's jaw. It was a pathetic display of physical aggression from a man who had never been in a fight in his life. The security officer, a man who looked like he was carved out of granite, did not even blink. He sidestepped Preston's clumsy haymaker with practicing ease. With a fluid motion that was almost graceful, he grabbed Preston's outstretched arm, used the momentum against him, and swept his legs out from under him. Preston hit the ground hard. The air left his lungs in a sharp, agonizing wheeze. His face was pressed into the cold, wet concrete right next to a muddy boot. He tried to scramble up, but the officer placed a heavy knee on his shoulder, pinning him effortlessly to the sidewalk. "Stay down," the officer commanded, his voice calm and bored. "Assaulting a licensed security agent is a felony, Mr. Caldwell. Do not add to your list of problems today." Beatrice let out a blood-curdling wail, dropping the champagne bottle. It shattered, sending glass and foam spraying over Preston's legs. "My baby. They are killing him. Help, someone help." Beatrice shrieked, looking around for an audience, but the pedestrians were just walking by, actively avoiding the drama of a rich family imploding on the street. Preston stopped struggling. The cold from the snow was seeping through his expensive suit, chilling him to the bone. He lay there, gasping for air, staring sideways at the gutter. He realized that the wet asphalt felt exactly as cold and unforgiving as the night he had forced me out. The only difference was that I had walked away with my dignity intact. He was lying in the dirt, pinned down by the consequences of his own arrogance. As the security team forced the revolving doors to spin, expelling the last of the Caldwell clan onto the freezing pavement, Camilla stumbled out in her stolen heels. She looked like a wreck. Her makeup was smeared, her hair was windblown, and she was clutching her phone like a talisman that had lost its magic. She spotted Andre standing near the curb, illuminated by the flashing hazard lights of the security vehicles. A look of desperate relief washed over her face. She truly believed he was there to rescue her, to use his knowledge of the building to argue some technicality that would let them back inside. "Andre," she screamed, shoving past a stunned doorman to get to him. "Thank God. Tell these Neanderthals who we are. Tell them they cannot evict a tenant without 30 days' notice. They just assaulted Preston. You have to sue them. She grabbed the lapels of his coat, trying to shake him into action, but Andre stood like a statue. He did not hug her back. He did not look angry at the guards. He gently but firmly peeled her fingers off his coat and took a step back, putting a definitive distance between them. I am not suing anyone, Camilla. Andre said, his voice flat and devoid of the warmth she was used to. I am here to deliver this. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a thick, folded document. Camilla froze. She stared at the paper, expecting an injunction against the eviction. Instead, she saw the bold heading at the top. Petition for dissolution of marriage. What is this? She whispered, her hands trembling in the cold. It is over, Andre said, looking at her with a mixture of pity and disgust. I told you yesterday to get out. I gave you a chance to leave with dignity. Instead, you chose to break federal laws and live-stream your own crime. No! Andre! Baby, listen! Camilla stammered, trying to grab his hand again. We can fix this. Preston will fix this. We just need to… Preston is currently handcuffed to a fire hydrant. Andre cut her off, gesturing to where her brother was groaning in the slush. I am a licensed architect, Camilla. My reputation is built on trust and stability. I cannot have my name attached to a family of grifters and squatters. I will not let you drag my career down into the gutter with you. He stepped closer, delivering the final blow that would shatter her completely. I have also filed for emergency full custody of our daughter. The judge has already seen the video of you neglecting her to sell stolen art. You are unfit, Camilla. You have no home, no income, and as of tonight, no husband. Camilla's knees gave out. She collapsed onto the wet sidewalk, the divorce papers fluttering down next to her like snow. She looked up at him, gasping for air, realizing that the walls she had helped build were not protecting her. They were crushing her. Andre turned his back on her, signaling a waiting taxi. He did not look back as she screamed his name. He got into the car and drove away, leaving her surrounded by her brother's broken golf clubs and the shattered remains of her delusions. For the first time in her life, Camilla Caldwell was exactly what she had always called me. Homeless, alone, and completely irrelevant. The flashing blue and red lights of the New York Police Department reflected off the wet pavement, mixing with the harsh white floodlights of the security team to create a kaleidoscope of chaos. To Beatrice, those sirens sounded like salvation. She wiped her eyes, smearing mascara across her cheeks, and pointed a trembling finger at the private security guards standing like sentinels at the entrance. Thank God you are here, she screamed at the approaching officers, her voice shrill with hysteria. These men are criminals. They assaulted my son. They threw us out of our own home. I want them all arrested immediately. Two uniformed officers stepped out of the lead cruiser, followed by a man in a long trench coat who looked like he had seen every scam New York had to offer. Detective Miller did not even glance at the security team. He walked straight past Beatrice, ignoring her demands, and stopped directly in front of Preston, who was still sitting in the slush, nursing his bruised ego. Preston Caldwell. Detective Miller asked, his voice gravelly and devoid of sympathy. Preston scrambled to his feet, trying to regain a shred of dignity despite his soaked suit. Yes, that is me, Preston said, straightening his tie. Officer, I want to file charges against the Laurent Trust for assault and illegal eviction. You have the right to remain silent, Miller interrupted, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Preston froze. The cold metal clicked around his right wrist before his brain could process what was happening. Beatrice gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. What are you doing? Preston stammered, pulling away. You are arresting the wrong person. I am the victim here. You are under arrest for grand larceny in the first degree and trafficking of stolen cultural property, Miller stated, spinning Preston around to cuff his other hand. Trafficking, Preston shouted, his face pressed against the hood of the police cruiser. I have never stolen anything in my life. We have a receipt from a pawn shop in the Lower East Side for a 19th century oil study belonging to the National Museum Miller, explained calmly. The seller was a member of your household. And since you signed a sworn affidavit at the bank this morning, claiming sole ownership and control of all assets within the penthouse, you are criminally liable for the liquidation of those assets. Preston's eyes went wide. He looked at Camilla, who was still sobbing on the curb. He realized instantly that the $5,000 she had bragged about earlier was the nail in his coffin. That was my sister, Preston yelled, trying to twist around. Camilla sold it. Not me. You claimed the house was yours, Mr. Caldwell, Miller said, tightening the cuffs. You claim the contents were yours. You cannot have the authority without the accountability. You also authorize the disposal of historical manuscripts into a dumpster. That is destruction of federal property. The neighbors who had been watching from their balconies began to murmur. Phones were raised. Flashes went off. The titan of industry was being stuffed into the back of a squad car like a common thief. Preston looked out the window, his face pale, and saw the flashing lights illuminating the crowd. He had wanted to be famous. He had wanted the world to know his name. As the door slammed shut, sealing him inside the cage, he realized he had finally gotten his wish, just not the way he intended. The chaos on the street was interrupted by the low, powerful hum of an engine that sounded like money. A sleek, midnight blue Maybach pulled up to the curb, effortlessly gliding through the maze of police cruisers and news vans. The tint was pitch black, obscuring the passenger, until the driver, a man in a pristine uniform, stepped out to open the rear door. The crowd went silent. Even the paparazzi lowered their cameras for a second, sensing a shift in the power dynamic. I stepped out onto the pavement. I was no longer wearing the oversized sweaters and sensible shoes I had worn to make myself small for Preston's ego. I was dressed in a tailored crimson suit that cost more than the engagement ring I had thrown into his coffee. My hair was pulled back. My posture was rigid, and for the first time in 5 years I looked exactly like the heiress my grandmother had raised me to be. Beatrice was the first to react. She saw me not as a person, but as a lifeline. The vitriol she had spewed moments ago vanished, replaced by a desperate clawing need. Genevieve, she shrieked, lunging toward me with her arms outstretched. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding. We are family. She never reached me. 2 members of my personal security detail, men who made the building guards look like amateurs, stepped in front of me. They didn't push her. They simply became a wall she could not pass. Beatrice bounced off them, stumbling back into the snow, looking up at me with eyes wide with shock. She wasn't used to hearing the word no, and she certainly wasn't used to being physically barred from access. I did not look down at her. My eyes were fixed on the squad car. The officer holding Preston paused, recognizing the authority in my arrival. He allowed Preston to lean out of the open door. Preston looked wrecked. His hair was plastered to his forehead, his suit was ruined, and the handcuffs were digging into his wrists. When he saw me, a flicker of hope ignited in his eyes. The pathetic hope of an abuser who thinks his victim is still under his spell. Jen, thank God, Preston panted, leaning forward, as far as the cuffs would allow. Baby, tell them. Tell them I have permission. Tell them we are married. You can't let them take me to jail. We are husband and wife. I walked closer, stopping just out of spitting distance. I looked at him, studying his face like it was a manuscript with a bad translation. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity, just the cold clarity of a contract fulfilled. Husband and wife. I repeated, my voice calm enough to be heard clearly by the reporters standing nearby. Yes, Preston cried, nodding frantically. We are partners. You signed the deed, but we are still married. I shook my head slowly. I pulled a copy of the quitclaim deed from my clutch, the very document he had forced me to sign. I read the fine print. Preston, did you, in your rush to draft this yourself to save money on legal fees, you included a clause in paragraph 4 to bypass the tenant protection laws. You defined the occupant to be removed as a non-familial, unauthorized transient. I leaned in closer, dropping my voice so only he could hear the final verdict. You didn't just try to steal my house, Preston. In the eyes of this document, and now in the eyes of the law, you defined me as a stranger. And strangers do not post bail for arsonists who burn down their own lives. I nodded to the officer. Take him away. Preston screamed my name as the door slammed shut, but the sound was muffled by the thick glass. I turned around, stepping back toward my car, leaving the wreckage of the Caldwell family in the rearview mirror where it belonged. The red and blue lights of the police cruiser washed over Preston's face, painting his terror in alternating shades of bruised purple and cold crimson. He was hyperventilating, pressing his forehead against the cold window glass, watching his entire future dissolve into a prison sentence. I stood on the sidewalk, my arms crossed against the biting wind, watching him crumble. Beside me, my personal attorney, a man whose hourly rate could bankrupt a small country, stepped forward. He did not look at Preston with pity. He looked at him like a surgeon deciding where to make the incision. He tapped on the glass. The officer looked at me for confirmation. I nodded. The window rolled down with a mechanical hum. Preston listened to me, my attorney said, his voice cutting through the sirens. Genevieve is willing to offer you a lifeline. But it is a one-time offer and it expires in 60 seconds. Preston scrambled toward the voice, rattling his handcuffs. Anything. I will do anything. Just get me out of here. My attorney pulled a single sheet of paper from his briefcase. It was rigid, heavy stock clipped to a board. We are willing to sign a sworn affidavit stating that the removal of the painting and the disposal of the manuscripts were a domestic misunderstanding. The attorney explained, his tone devoid of emotion. If Genevieve refuses to press charges, the district attorney will likely drop the grand larceny case. You will walk away tonight without a criminal record. Thank you, God. Thank you. Preston sobbed, looking at me with pathetic gratitude. Jen, I knew you still loved me. I knew you would not let them ruin me. I stepped closer, blocking his view of the street. Do not mistake mercy for love, Preston. There is a price. My attorney held the clipboard up to the window. In exchange for the non-prosecution waiver, you will sign this confession of judgment. It states that you accept full personal liability for the outstanding debt to the Laurent Preservation LLC. That is $3.2 million in back rent, taxes, and damages. You also agree to issue a public retraction of your statements regarding Genevieve's mental health to be published in the Times tomorrow morning. Preston froze. He looked at the paper, then at the handcuffs. He did the math in his head. $3 million was a fortune, but prison was the end of his life. He was a coward who feared a cage more than he feared bankruptcy. He thought he could hustle his way out of debt. He did not understand that this debt was designed to be an anchor he could never swim with. Give me the pen, Preston whispered, his voice trembling. The officer unlocked one of his hands. Preston reached through the window, his fingers shaking so violently he could barely hold the pen. He did not read the terms. He did not check for loopholes. He just pressed the nib to the paper and scribbled his name. Preston Caldwell. I watched the ink dry. That signature was heavier than the one he had forced out of me. It was his unconditional surrender. He thought he was buying his freedom. In reality, he had just signed a contract that would garnish his wages, seize his future assets, and keep him in financial servitude for the rest of his life. I took the clipboard back. I nodded to the officer. Let him go, I said softly. As the cuffs clicked open, Preston slumped against the door, weeping with relief. He did not realize that I had saved him from a concrete cell, only to lock him in a prison of his own, making one without walls, but from which there was absolutely no escape. 3 months is not a long time in the grand scheme of history, but in the life of Beatrice Caldwell, it was an eternity. The woman who once lectured me on the importance of thread counts and table settings was now living in a 400-square-foot walk-up in the Bronx. The paint on the walls was peeling, a stark contrast to the hand-painted wallpaper she had commissioned for the penthouse. The radiator in the corner hissed and clanked violently, mocking the silence of her phone. The social exile had been swift and brutal. In high society, scandal is contagious. and the Caldwell name had become a pathogen. The ladies who used to drink mimosas with her at the country club didn't just stop calling, they blocked her number. The charity boards she sat on quietly removed her name from their websites. When Preston's confession hit the papers admitting to the fraud and the theft, Beatrice didn't just lose her son to the legal system, she lost her identity. She was no longer the matriarch of a wealthy dynasty. She was the mother of a felon and a woman who had been publicly exposed as a squatter in her daughter-in-law's property. Beatrice sat on the edge of her sagging mattress staring at her hands. The manicure was long gone. Her skin, once softened by expensive creams, was red and cracked. She looked at the clock. It was time to go. She put on a polyester uniform that smelled faintly of stale grease and bleach. It was 2 sizes too big, but she couldn't afford to have it tailored. She took the subway to a diner in Midtown, keeping her head down, terrified that someone might recognize her. But nobody looked. In this world, she was invisible. She walked into the kitchen, the heat hitting her face like a physical blow. The head chef, a man who didn't care about her pedigree, pointed to the sink. "You are late, Beatrice," he grunted. "That is coming out of your tips. Start scrubbing." Beatrice walked to the industrial sink. It was piled high with dirty dishes, plates smeared with ketchup cups, stained with cheap coffee. She plunged her hands into the scalding, soapy water. The woman who had thrown a fit because a crystal glass had a smudge on it was now scraping half-eaten food into a garbage disposal for $15 an hour. A waitress pushed through the swinging doors, dumping a tray of silverware onto the counter. "Hey B, table 4 says this fork is dirty. Wash it again." Beatrice gripped the sponge until her knuckles turned white. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell them that she used to host galas. She wanted to say that she was a Caldwell, but the words died in her throat. She realized with a crushing clarity that the name Caldwell meant nothing here. It didn't buy respect. It didn't buy silence. It didn't even buy a clean fork. She looked at her reflection in the stainless steel backsplash. The woman staring back was old, tired, and completely alone. She scrubbed the fork, the metal scraping against the metal, a harsh, rhythmic reminder that her pride was the only thing she had left to swallow. And it tasted bitter. If Beatrice's fall was a tragedy of pride, Camilla's was a comedy of errors that ended in a plea deal. The district attorney was not as lenient with her as I was with Preston. The evidence regarding the sale of the stolen Hudson River painting was irrefutable thanks to the receipts Silas had so carefully preserved. To avoid a 5-year sentence in a federal penitentiary for trafficking stolen cultural goods, Camilla had to plead guilty to fraud and agree to a restitution plan that garnished 70% of her wages for the next decade. But the real punishment was not the debt. It was the employment. With a criminal record for theft, the luxury boutiques she used to frequent would not even let her in the door, let alone hire her. The influencer agencies dropped her the moment her mugshot went viral. Desperate and facing homelessness, she took the only job that did not require a background check, the night shift sanitation crew for a commercial cleaning service. Fate, it seems, has a wicked sense of humor. The contract her agency assigned her to was for the Millennium Tower, the very building where Andre had recently been promoted to senior partner at his architectural firm. It was a Tuesday evening just past 7. The lobby was quiet, save for the rhythmic squeak of Camilla's rubber-soled shoes on the polished terrazzo floor. She was pushing a heavy industrial mop bucket, wearing a gray jumpsuit that was shapeless and stained, a far cry from the silk dress she had stolen from me. She was wiping down the glass turnstiles, her face burning with a mixture of exhaustion and shame when the elevator chimed. Andre stepped out. He looked different. The weight of the Caldwell family was gone from his shoulders. He was laughing, walking alongside 2 high-profile developers who were hanging on his every word. He looked successful, vibrant, and free. Camilla froze. She tried to turn away to hide behind a pillar, but there was nowhere to go. Andre stopped mid-sentence. His eyes landed on the woman scrubbing the floor. He took in the gray uniform, the messy hair, the bucket of dirty water. For a second, Camilla straightened up, a flicker of her old entitlement sparking in her eyes, as if she expected him to recognize his mistake and whisk her away back to a life of comfort. "Andre," she whispered, her voice cracking. Andre did not sneer. He did not mock her. He simply looked at her with the polite, distant recognition one gives to a stranger they might have met once in a past life. He turned back to the developers. "Shall we continue this over dinner?" Andre asked, gesturing toward the exit. "The lighting concept for the atrium needs to be perfect." He walked right past her. He did not break stride. The breeze from the revolving door hit Camilla in the face as he left, carrying the scent of expensive cologne and success. She stood there, gripping the handle of the mop, watching the man she had called a loser get into a town car while she was left to clean up the mud his shoes had left behind. She looked at her reflection in the glass she had just polished. The golden child was gone. All that was left was a bitter woman with a criminal record and a bucket of dirty water. She dipped the mop back in, and for the first time in her life, she started to work. The sharp chemical sting of industrial detergent was the only thing Preston Caldwell could smell anymore. It had seeped into his pores, masking the lingering memory of the expensive cologne he used to wear. He stood in the damp concrete bay of the Spotless Shine car wash in Queens, holding a high-pressure sprayer that vibrated violently in his grip. His hands, once manicured and used only for signing checks and holding champagne flutes, were raw, chapped, and stained with grease. The Chapter 7 bankruptcy filing had stripped him of everything. The courts had taken the condo, the crypto, and the dignity. All that remained was a criminal record that made him unemployable in any office in Manhattan. So he washed cars for minimum wage, scrubbing the mud off the tires of vehicles he used to scoff at. It was a busy Saturday afternoon. A parade of SUVs and luxury sedans lined up their drivers, sitting comfortably behind climate-controlled glass, while Preston froze in the spray. He kept his head down, the bill of his cap pulled low. He was terrified of being recognized, but he soon realized that nobody looks at the car wash guy. To the wealthy elite he used to desperately try to emulate, he was now just part of the machinery. He was invisible. Then the low, throaty growl of a twin-turbo V8 engine echoed off the wet tiles. Preston froze. He knew that sound. It was a sound that had haunted his dreams for 3 months. He looked up slowly. Rolling into the bay was a Ferrari Roma Spider. It was painted in Rosso Corsa red, the exact specification he had ordered in the showroom the day before his life imploded. It gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a masterpiece of Italian engineering that represented everything Preston had lost. The driver rolled down the window. He was a young man, barely 30, wearing a crisp suit and talking on an earpiece about a merger. He looked exactly like Preston had looked in his prime, radiating unearned confidence. "Hey, buddy," the driver called out, not even looking at Preston. "Be careful with the carbon fiber rims. I just picked this up last week. Do not scratch it." Preston felt bile rise in his throat. "Buddy!" The word was a slap in the face. He wanted to scream. He wanted to tell this kid that he knew more about the torque specs of this car than the owner did. He wanted to say that he had almost owned it, but he said nothing. He couldn't afford to lose this job. He needed the money for his bus fare. "Yes, sir," Preston mumbled, the words tasting like ash. He knelt down on the wet concrete. The cold water soaked through the knees of his jumpsuit. He took the soapy sponge and began to scrub the wheels of the Ferrari. He touched the smooth metal, his fingers tracing the curves he had fantasized about driving through the Hamptons. It was torture. It was a physical manifestation of his failure. Every circular motion of the sponge was a reminder of the signature he had scrawled in the back of that police car, the signature that had saved him from prison but enslaved him to debt. When the car was finished, the driver tossed a crumpled $5 bill out the window. It fluttered down and landed in a puddle of dirty water near Preston's boot. "Keep the change," the driver said, revving the engine. Preston watched the Ferrari peel out of the bay, the red taillights disappearing into the traffic. He stood there for a long moment, shivering. Then slowly he bent down and plucked the wet $5 bill from the puddle. He put it in his pocket, picked up the sprayer, and waited for the next car to arrive. The gavel struck the mahogany block with a sound that echoed through the grand hall of the Hotel Drouot in Paris, silencing the murmurs of the European elite. "Sold for €3 million to the gentleman on the phone," the auctioneer announced in French. I stood at the side of the stage watching the room with a calm, practiced detachment. Outside, the rain was turning the streets of the Ninth Arrondissement into shimmering rivers of light, but inside the air was warm and smelled of beeswax, old parchment, and immense wealth. I was no longer the woman who hid in the back of the library wearing oversized cardigans. I was wearing a tailored black jumpsuit that fit like a second skin, my hair cut into a sharp chic bob that framed a face which had finally learned to stop apologizing. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer continued, gesturing toward me, "please join me in thanking the curator of this evening's collection, the woman who single-handedly saved the Montclair archives from dissolution, the guardian of history, Madame Geneviève Laurent." The applause was polite, rhythmic, and respectful. I stepped into the spotlight. I did not shrink from it. I absorbed it. 3 months ago, I was fighting for the right to sleep in my own home. Tonight I was facilitating the exchange of cultural heritage worth more than Preston's entire lifetime earnings. After the auction, the room dissolved into a cocktail reception. I navigated the crowd with the ease of a shark in clear water. Collectors and museum directors vied for my attention, hoping to get a preview of the next catalog. "Geneviève," a voice called out. I turned to see Henri, a charming art dealer from Zurich I had worked with on the restoration board. He was handsome, wealthy, and made no secret of his affections. He stepped close, offering me a glass of vintage champagne. "Another triumph," Henri said, smiling. "You have a golden touch, ma chérie. But you look tired. Let me take you to dinner. There is a quiet place near the Seine, just us." I looked at him. He was a good man, a safe choice. The old Geneviève, the one who craved validation, would have said yes. She would have been flattered that a man of his stature wanted to be seen with her. But I was not that woman anymore. I took the champagne, took a sip, and set it down on a passing tray. "I cannot tonight, Henri," I said, my voice soft but firm. "I have a flight to Rome in the morning. The Vatican Library has requested a consultation on a water-damaged manuscript." Henri looked disappointed but undeterred. "You work too hard, Jen. You have the money. You have the fame. What are you chasing? You need someone to share this life with, a partner." I smiled, and for the first time it was a smile of genuine, unburdened amusement. "I spent 5 years trying to be a partner, Henri. I shrank myself to fit into someone else's life. I do not need a partner to define my worth anymore. I have my work, I have my name, and for the first time in my life that is more than enough." I walked away from him, heading toward the balcony doors. I stepped out into the cool Parisian night. The Eiffel Tower sparkled in the distance, a beacon of iron and light. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air of a city that respects history. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I was free. And as I looked out over the lights of the city, I realized that the best story I had ever restored was my own. The suite at the Ritz in Paris was silent, save for the crackling of birch logs in the marble fireplace. I sat in a velvet armchair nursing a glass of sparkling water, the adrenaline of the auction slowly fading into a quiet exhaustion. On the silver tray near the door, amidst invitations to galas and thank-you notes from museum directors, sat a single discordant object. It was a plain white envelope, thin and cheap, stamped with the unmistakable insignia of the New York State Department of Corrections. I picked it up. The paper felt rough against my fingertips, a stark contrast to the heavy linen stationery I was accustomed to. The handwriting on the front was familiar, though it lacked the aggressive flourish it once possessed. It was shaky, smaller, written with a dull pencil. Preston Caldwell. I held the envelope up to the light. I could see the folded, lined paper inside. I knew exactly what it contained without breaking the seal. It would be a manifesto of regret. It would be page after page of excuses, blaming his mother, blaming the stress, blaming the bank. It would eventually pivot to begging, asking for money for a lawyer, or just for a reply. It was a trap. It was an attempt to tether me back to his drowning ship, to force me to acknowledge his existence one last time. For a moment, I considered opening it. Human curiosity is a powerful thing. I wondered if he had finally found humility in that cell. I wondered if he understood the magnitude of what he had done. But then I remembered the look on his face in the police car. It wasn't the look of a man who was sorry he hurt me. It was the look of a man who was sorry he lost. I stood up and walked to the fireplace. The heat flushed against my cheeks. I looked at the envelope one last time. To read it would be to give him a voice in my head again. To read it would be to let him interrupt my peace. I realized that his words no longer held any currency. They were just graphite on dead wood. I tossed the unopened letter onto the burning logs. It did not explode. It did not make a sound. It simply curled at the edges, the white paper turning brown, then black. The blue ink of the stamp blistered and vanished. The name Preston Caldwell caught fire, glowing bright orange for a split second before disintegrating into gray ash. I watched it burn until there was nothing left but a wisp of smoke rising up the chimney, carrying the last remnant of my marriage out into the cold Paris night. I took a sip of my water, feeling a lightness in my chest that I hadn't felt in a decade. An apology is a transaction, I thought, watching the embers fade. It requires a recipient willing to accept the currency. But an apology only has value when the person offering it still has the power to make things right. It is a promise of a future change. But for you, Preston, there is no future with me. The opportunity to be a good man didn't end when the judge sentenced you. It ended the moment you locked me out in the snow and decided I was a stranger. And strangers don't read each other's mail. I walked out onto the stone balcony of the suite. The air was crisp and carried the distinct scent of Paris rain on pavement, roasting chestnuts and the River Seine. Below me, the city was waking up to its nightlife, a grid of golden lights stretching out to the horizon. It was a view that Preston would have killed for. He would have taken a photo of it to impress strangers on the internet. I just stood there and let it fill my lungs, feeling the cold iron of the railing under my palms. I turned away from the skyline and looked directly at you. Not past you, but into you. They called me a librarian. They called me a caretaker. They called me a ghost in my own home. For 5 years I let them define me. I let them appraise my value, based on how well I polished their ego and how quietly I disappeared when they were done with me. I made the mistake of thinking that if I made myself small enough, they would finally give me the space to exist. But here is what I learned when the locks were changed and the snow started to fall. Never let anyone appraise you like a piece of used furniture. You are not an asset to be leveraged. You are not a line item on someone else's balance sheet. Your worth is not determined by the ring on your finger or the name on your mailbox. It is determined by what you are willing to tolerate and what you are willing to burn down to save yourself. And more importantly, read the fine print. Read every single word. Read the parts they tell you are standard. Read the clauses they say do not matter. Because the devil is not in the details. The devil is in the ignorance they count on you having. Preston thought he was the master of the contract because he held the pen. He forgot that the person who understands the definitions is the one who controls the outcome. Do not just occupy the space they allow you to have. Own the building. Own the knowledge. Own the silence. Be the thing they desperately covet, but are too intellectually bankrupt to afford. Be the asset that cannot be liquidated, transferred, or stolen. I looked back at the Eiffel Tower shimmering like a beacon of iron and will. A small knowing smile touched my lips. It was not a smile of vengeance. It was the smile of a woman who had restored the most valuable masterpiece in her collection, herself. I turned my back on the camera. I did not look back. I walked into the warm golden light of the suite, closing the heavy glass doors behind me, leaving the noise, the drama, and the past outside in the cold where it belonged. The screen faded to black, leaving only the silence of absolute victory. To understand the absolute devastation of Preston Caldwell, one must look beyond the courtroom drama and return to a quiet, dust-mote-filled room 48 hours before the eviction. We cut back to the mahogany-paneled study of my late grandmother, a room that smelled of dried lavender and old money. I sat across from Arthur Sterling, the family's executor, a man who had served the Lorents since before I was born. Outside, the storm that would eventually freeze Preston on the sidewalk was just beginning to gather gray and heavy against the leaded glass windows. I was trembling then, holding the draft of the quitclaim deed Preston had thrown at me that morning. I was terrified. I thought I was about to sign away my birthright to keep the peace. I thought I was losing. Arthur took the deed from my shaking hands. He did not look worried. He looked like a grandmaster watching a novice move a pawn into a trap. He placed the deed on the desk next to a much older leather-bound document, the original charter of the Laurent Preservation Trust. He opened the heavy book to page 14, smoothing the parchment with a reverence usually reserved for religious texts. "You are misinterpreting the architecture of this estate," Genevieve Arthur said, his voice gravelly and calm. "You believe this apartment is a marital asset. You believe it is a home. It is neither." He tapped a specific paragraph, Clause 14b, written in dense, archaic legalese. "Your grandmother Eleanor was a woman of immense foresight. She knew that wealth attracts predators. She knew that one day someone might try to use your heart to get to her vault. So she built a failsafe into the very foundation of the property title. We call it the ironclad usufruct, or in modern corporate terms, a poison pill." I leaned in reading the text. It spoke of residential privilege and commercial reversion. Arthur continued removing his reading glasses to look me in the eye. "The penthouse is legally a museum annex. It enjoys tax-exempt status and residential zoning solely because of the presence of a bloodline guardian. That is you. You are the human key that keeps the legal status locked in residential mode." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Think of the apartment like a pressurized submarine. As long as you are inside, the pressure is equalized. You and your spouse can live there, but the moment the guardian is removed under duress, or the moment a non-blood relative attempts to claim sole dominion, the pressure seal breaks. The legal status instantly reverts from private residence to commercial storage facility." I stared at him, the realization slowly dawning on me. "So if I leave..." "If you leave..." Arthur interrupted, a small, cold smile touching his lips. "The apartment ceases to be a home. It becomes a warehouse, in the most expensive zip code in the world. And anyone remaining inside who is not an employee of the trust is no longer a husband or a resident. They are classified as an unauthorized commercial tenant." He picked up the quitclaim deed Preston had drafted, the weapon my husband thought would destroy me. "Preston thinks this paper proves he owns the house," Arthur said. "But because he forced you to state that you are vacating all rights, he is unknowingly signing a confession. He is legally documenting the exact moment the guardian left the post. He is pulling the pin on the grenade and holding it against his own chest. The system will automatically bill him for commercial rent retroactive to the first day he moved in, because without you, his presence there was never legally subsidized." I looked at the portrait of my grandmother hanging above the fireplace. Her eyes were painted with a sharp, discerning glint that I had always found intimidating. Now it looked like protection. "She knew," I whispered. "She knew he would do this." Arthur nodded slowly. He opened a drawer and pulled out a handwritten note on yellowed stationery. "She sat in this very chair the week before she died," Arthur said softly. "She told me to draft Clause 14b specifically for the man you had just started dating. I asked her if she thought that was necessary. I will never forget what she said." He handed me the note. I recognized her jagged, elegant script immediately. "Protect Genevieve from her own heart. The boy is a hollow suit. The only thing cheaper than his character is his earning potential. When he inevitably tries to steal the frame, make sure he finds himself buried under the canvas." I ran my thumb over the ink. Tears pricked my eyes not for Preston, but for the fierce, silent love of a woman who had played a game of chess against my husband years before he even knew he was on the board. She hadn't just left me money, she had left me a weapon disguised as a legacy. I looked back at Arthur. I took the pen he offered. My hand stopped shaking. So when I signed this deed for Preston, I asked, my voice steady, I am not giving him the house. Arthur shook his head. No, my dear, you are giving him the bill. I signed the paper then, and the memory faded, bringing us back to the present. The logic was perfect. The trap was inescapable. Preston hadn't been defeated by a lawyer in a courtroom. He had been defeated by the ghost of an old woman who knew that greedy men never read the fine print. I closed the heavy file on my desk, the final sound of the case clicking shut. I had not only won the war, I had proven that the Laurent name was not something you could steal. It was something you had to survive. The late afternoon sun in Saint-Germain-des-Prés was a golden balm compared to the gray, biting cold of New York. I sat at a small round table outside Café de Flore, watching the Parisians drift by with their effortless elegance. Across from me sat André. If I had not known him for 5 years, I might not have recognized the man. The perpetual furrow in his brow was gone. The nervous habit of checking his watch every 2 minutes, terrified of being late for one of Camilla's tantrums, had vanished. He was wearing a linen blazer and an open-collar shirt, looking less like a hostage and more like the brilliant architect he was always meant to be. He took a sip of his espresso, savoring it with a calmness that used to be impossible for him. She called again last week, André said, his voice level. She used a burner phone. She wanted money for rent. She said living in a basement in Queens was beneath her dignity. And what did you do? I asked, breaking a piece of croissant. I hung up, he replied simply. I did not apologize. I did not explain. I just blocked the number. It felt like breathing for the first time in a decade. He looked at me, then his eyes serious. There was something he had been wanting to say since he arrived in Paris, a heavy truth that needed to be placed on the table between us. Jen, I need to thank you, André said, leaning forward. For the contract I asked referencing the new design commission for the Laurent Museum expansion in Milan. You earned that on merit, André. Your portfolio was always superior, you just never had the confidence to pitch it. No, not for the job, he shook his head. I need to thank you for not warning me about the raid. I paused, setting my cup down. I had carried a small seed of guilt about that. I had known the security team was going in, and I had known André might be caught in the crossfire. I was afraid you would hate me for that, I admitted. It was brutal. It was necessary, André corrected firmly. If you had called me, if you had told me to get Camilla out because the wolves were coming, I would have done it. My codependency would have kicked in. I would have saved her one last time. I would have packed her bags, found her a hotel, and probably paid for it. I would have robbed myself of the moment that finally broke the spell. He looked out at the street, remembering the image of his wife screaming on the sidewalk, not for him, but for her lost status. I needed to see them hit the pavement. André continued. I needed to see Camilla choose her vanity over our daughter. I needed the shock of that violence to realize that I was not protecting a family. I was enabling a parasite. You did not just evict them, Jenin. You liberated me. He reached into his bag and pulled out a roll of blueprints. They were the preliminary sketches for the new wing of the library, a structure of glass and light, transparent and strong, exactly the opposite of the dark, oppressive penthouse we had left behind. We are going to build something incredible. André said, his passion for his work finally unburdened by drama. No more hiding. No more apologizing for being talented. I raised my wine glass. The sunlight caught the deep red liquid. We were 2 survivors of a shipwreck who had managed to swim to a better shore. We shared no blood, but looking at him I realized we shared something far more durable: mutual respect, and the scars of a battle we had both won. To the future, I said softly. André clinked his cup against my glass, a genuine smile reaching his eyes. To the things we build, he replied, and the things we were smart enough to leave behind. The late afternoon light filtered through the high windows of the Parisian studio, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like suspended gold. I sat at the workbench, the world reduced to the square foot of illuminated space beneath my magnifying lamp. My hands, steady and surgical, moved with a rhythm honed by decades of practice. Before me lay a 17th-century manuscript, its vellum pages marred by time and neglect. In my trade, we have a specific name for the enemy. We call it foxing. I dipped a delicate brush into a solution of calcium hydroxide, dabbing it onto a cluster of reddish-brown spots that bloomed across the margin of page 42. To the untrained eye, foxing looks like character. It looks like the romantic patina of age. But an archivist knows the truth. It is a fungal growth, a chemical reaction to metallic impurities in the paper. It feeds on the fiber. It spreads silently, eating the history from the inside out until the structure is too brittle to turn. If you ignore it, it does not go away. It consumes. I watched the chemical react, lifting the stain from the fiber. Preston was the moisture. Beatrice was the spore. Camilla was the rot. For 5 years, I treated their cruelty like foxing. I thought if I was just gentle enough, if I applied enough patience and warmth, I could bleach out their flaws. I thought I could restore them into the family they pretended to be. I spent my energy trying to preserve a text that was written in poison. I picked up a scalpel. There was a section of the binding that was too corrupted to save. A deep black mold that threatened the integrity of the spine. I did not hesitate. With a single fluid motion, I sliced it away. The corrupted leather fell onto the table, lifeless and severed. There is a hard lesson in restoration that took me a lifetime to learn. You cannot save everything. Sometimes the rot runs too deep. Sometimes the only way to save the book is to cut out the infection. You do not negotiate with fungus. You eliminate it. I applied the fresh wheat paste, binding the clean new leather to the spine. The smell of the adhesive was sharp and clean, the scent of a fresh start. I smoothed the material down, feeling the strength return to the object under my hands. It was no longer fragile. It was fortified. I closed the book. The cover was new, pristine, emblazoned with fresh gold leaf that caught the dying sun. I ran my hand over the title, feeling the cool, smooth texture of a job finished. I stood up and walked to the mahogany bookshelf that lined the far wall. I placed the restored volume into the empty slot. It fit perfectly. Next to it sat a small silver-framed photograph. It was not a wedding photo. It was a picture taken last week in Rome. I was standing alone in front of the Trevi fountain, throwing a coin over my shoulder, laughing with a joy so pure it looked like light. I looked at the photo, then at the book. The heavy weight that had sat on my chest for years was gone, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman who has finally corrected a fatal error. The foxing is gone. I thought the silence of the room wrapping around me like a warm coat. The rot has been excised. Finally, after all this time, the page is clean. I turned away from the bookshelf, the spine of the newly restored manuscript gleaming in the soft light behind me. I walked slowly toward the center of the room, my heels clicking rhythmically on the parquet floor. I stopped in front of the large gilded mirror that hung above the fireplace, adjusting the collar of my blazer. For a moment, I studied my reflection. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. The woman looking back at me was whole. Then I shifted my gaze. I looked past my reflection and locked eyes directly with you. The fourth wall dissolved. I was no longer a character in a drama. I was a witness testifying to the truth. There is a seduction in trust. We are taught that love means surrender. We are taught that asking questions is an insult to the relationship. Preston counted on that. He banked on the idea that I would be too polite to read the fine print, too timid to protect my own interests. He thought my silence was submission. He did not realize it was just the quiet before the audit. If you take only one thing from my story, let it be this: never under any circumstances sign a document you have not read. Never let someone pressure you into waiving your rights by telling you it is just a formality. A contract is not a formality, it is a weapon. And you should be terrified when the person handing you the pen claims to love you but refuses to respect your need for security. I am Genevieve Laurent. I am no longer defined by a marriage certificate or a foreclosure notice. I have reclaimed my name, I have reclaimed my fortune, and most importantly, I have reclaimed the narrative. I am writing my own chapters now, and the ink is permanent. And as for Preston, he is currently standing in a damp bay in Queens, scrubbing the road salt off a luxury sedan he will never be able to afford. He is working double shifts to pay the interest on a $3.2 million education in contract law. He wanted to be a part of the Laurent legacy. Now he is. He is a line item in our accounts receivable ledger, a debt that will follow him longer than his shadow. But I know I am not the only one. Wolves often wear the clothing of family members. They hide in shared bank accounts and joint ventures. They weaponize your guilt to fund their delusions. Have you ever been used by someone you trusted? Has a partner, a parent, or a sibling mistaken your kindness for weakness? Do not let them silence you. I want to read your story. Tell me in the comments below how you stood your ground. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it is okay to say no. Please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories of justice to be told, and we are just getting started. We will expose the manipulators, the narcissists, and the thieves, one legal clause at a time. Remember this: you do not need to scream to be heard. You do not need to get your hands dirty to win a fight. The most devastating blow you can deal to the people who tried to break you is not a lawsuit. It is not an insult. The sweetest, most absolute revenge is to live a life so happy, so successful, and so radiantly free that they have to watch you shine from the darkness where you left them. I smiled a genuine, dazzling smile that reached my eyes. I turned and walked toward the balcony, stepping out into the twilight of Paris, leaving the empty room behind me. The screen faded to black. A sharp metallic sound echoed the heavy thud of a judge's gavel striking wood, followed by the stamp of red ink. Case closed. The most profound lesson from Genevieve's story is that knowledge is the only armor that truly protects you when love turns into war. For years, Genevieve allowed herself to be diminished, believing that patience and submission would eventually earn her respect. She learned the hard way that you cannot love a narcissist into becoming a good person. Preston's downfall wasn't caused by bad luck. It was caused by his arrogance and his refusal to read the fine print of life. He assumed his wife was weak because she was quiet, not realizing that silence is often where strategy is built. The story teaches us that financial and legal literacy are not just administrative skills, they are acts of self-defense. In relationships, we are often told that unconditional trust is the ideal. However, Genevieve's victory proves that trust should never come at the expense of your own security. By understanding the legal framework of her inheritance, the LLC, and the trust, she turned the very weapon Preston used against her, the eviction, into his destruction. The poison pill clause wasn't just a legal mechanism, it was a metaphor for boundaries. It established that her presence and her value were non-negotiable. Ultimately, this narrative reminds us that the best revenge is not screaming fighting in the mud or stooping to the level of your abuser. It is simply enforcing the contract of your own dignity. When you know your worth and understand the rules of the game, you don't need to argue with those who try to devalue you. You simply let the consequences do the talking. If you are currently holding on to a relationship or a situation that requires you to shrink yourself to fit in, ask yourself today, is it time to stop negotiating with the foxing in your life and finally turn the page to your own victory?